There's something that almost nobody talks about, but it comes up frequently in the deep hypnosis sessions conducted by Dolores Cannon. Moments before an elderly person passes away, they see something. It's not just a tunnel of light or a relative coming to get them. It's a much more subtle, quiet, and revealing experience. According to reports gathered over decades, there's a specific moment when the soul begins to separate from the body, and in that instant, the elderly person often sees a kind of projection, something many describe as an intimate truth revealed. It's not a frightening vision nor a promise of heaven or hell. It's as if God or a higher intelligence shows exactly what the person most needs to understand before departing. It's something deeply personal. It could be a memory, a feeling, a symbolic image, but it always has a purpose: to help the soul accept, understand, and be set free. These accounts started appearing more frequently as Dolores Cannon interviewed patients in an expanded state of consciousness. Most of these people were elderly or on the verge of death. They didn't know what they would reveal during hypnosis, but when they were taken back to the final moments of their past or current lives, they described something similar: a moment of revelation. This caught attention because it wasn't induced or suggested. The unconscious mind just showed it. And in that fraction of time, many said they felt absolute peace, as if they'd received an answer they'd been waiting for their whole lives. This is one of those things you rarely come across, but it can change the way you look at your own twilight years. If this has touched you in some way, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It helps get this message to more people like you. One of the most common revelations described by elders in transition is an apparently simple memory, but one full of meaning. A hug they gave, a word they didn't say, a forgotten moment from childhood. The mind, in its final seconds, seems to bring forward what has the most value, not to judge but to remember. It's as if God were saying, "Look at this one more time, see how important it was." There's no judgment in this process. Even people who carried deep guilt reported not seeing condemnation. Instead, they saw possibilities they hadn't seen before, and interestingly, they said they understood everything in silence, without the need for words. This shows that in the end, the soul seeks meaning more than explanation. In one of the most impressive accounts, an 84-year-old man in a terminal state described seeing a golden field with children running. He said he knew, without anyone needing to explain, that those children represented all the joy he had allowed to exist in the world. Even without knowing it, even in small actions, that was recorded. This vision made him cry, but with relief. He said he never imagined he'd made a difference, and there he understood that every gesture had been observed, valued, and preserved. Dolores Cannon noted this account because it appeared in a similar way in dozens of other sessions. Sometimes the field changed, the setting varied, but the feeling was the same: the confirmation that the existence had value. Another recurring element in pre-transition experiences is the presence of a figure. It doesn't matter what the person's religion is. This figure never introduces itself by name, but it transmits calm. Many elderly people say that this presence reminds them of something familiar. It might seem like a grandfather, a mother, even an old friend. But when they try to really look, they realize it doesn't have a defined face. Still, they feel they've been recognized, welcomed, and understood. This presence doesn't speak, but it transmits everything that needs to be said. And it almost always appears to show that the moment is coming, but there's nothing to fear. The fear begins to dissolve, and in its place a feeling of acceptance is born that few people can explain in words. There are also reports in which the elderly person, moments before death, sees scenes from the future, but not their own future, but that of those who remain. They see children overcoming sadness, grandchildren growing up, loved ones moving forward. Not as a movie, but as an instantaneous knowing. Dolores Cannon said that this happened to ease the heart of the departing soul, to know that the pain of absence will pass, that the love left behind continues to multiply. These moments seem to be a divine gift, given with the sole purpose of making the farewell lighter. There's no way to prove this with science, but the accounts are too consistent to be ignored. It's as if life in its last act offers the soul a chance to say goodbye with a broader understanding of what really matters. Among the many cases gathered by Dolores, there was an interesting pattern. The elderly people who most resisted the idea of death often saw images related to forgiveness. Sometimes they saw the face of someone they hurt in the past, or situations in which they would have liked to have acted differently. But surprisingly, these visions didn't come with weight or guilt. They came with a sense of resolution. Many said they felt something was dissolving there, as if a rope that held them inside finally came loose. Some even reported hearing a phrase in thought, "Now you understand." It was as if the higher consciousness only wanted to show that no mistake defines a life, and that even suffering can have generated learning, growth, or compassion. The objective seemed to be to liberate, never to punish. Another pattern that stood out was the absolute silence described in these moments. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a full silence. The elderly people said that even being surrounded by devices, noises, and movements in the hospital or at home, there was an instant when everything disappeared. Only silence remained and a kind of pause in time. Within this silence, the revelation happened. And it was in this space that they saw with more clarity who they had been, what they had loved, and how everything made sense. Dolores Cannon believed that this silence was, in fact, the frequency of the soul returning home, a state in which nothing external interferes, and the spirit begins to align with something much greater, something she called divine consciousness. In several testimonies, the elderly people stated that they felt like they were returning to a place they already knew, but had forgotten. There was no surprise, no shock, just recognition. It was like remembering an old song or rediscovering a landscape from childhood. This feeling of return was so strong that some even smiled in their final minutes, even without being fully conscious. Nurses and caregivers reported this phenomenon frequently. Elderly people who closed their eyes with a serene expression, like someone who finally understood something important. This phenomenon, although invisible to the eyes of those watching from outside, is described in hypnosis sessions as one of the most significant moments of the soul's journey. The vision that each elderly person has before dying always seems linked to their essence. It doesn't matter their religion, their level of consciousness, or their life path. An illiterate farmer saw his seeds blossoming in a field that wasn't physical, but spiritual. A retired teacher saw all the children she had taught throughout her life laughing together in a lit room. A former combatant saw his fallen comrades waving to him from the top of a hill, at peace. What these visions have in common is the feeling that the soul, as it frees itself from the body, rediscovers what was purest, truest, most meaningful. It's as if existence boiled down to these essential moments. Dolores said that this was the true legacy that each one carried with them. Interestingly, there are reports of elderly people who didn't see images, but felt aromas. A blind man, for example, said in a trance that in his final moments he was enveloped by a smell of baked bread, just like his mother's kitchen. He didn't see anything, but he said that in that smell was all the love he had known in his life. Another elderly woman, who hadn't spoken in weeks, murmured the name of the perfume she used in her youth before passing away. These sensory details, even when isolated, seem to carry deep meanings. They aren't religious visions, nor clinical delusions. They are coded messages from the soul, signs that there is something beyond what we understand. Dolores Cannon stated that these experiences show that consciousness doesn't fade away, it just changes plane. It's also common for elderly people to report that before dying they can see someone waiting for them. It could be a loved one, a pet, even a stranger who transmits security. This figure doesn't say anything, doesn't demand anything. It just waits. Dolores observed that this presence always brought a silent message of welcome. For many, this was the confirmation that they wouldn't be alone. Even the most skeptical, when reliving this moment under hypnosis, felt relief when remembering the feeling of companionship. It was as if the fear of death dissolved when perceiving that the end isn't empty, but a reunion. And this reunion, according to these accounts, isn't with something external, but with one's own origin. Among the most touching accounts gathered by Dolores Cannon, there's the one of a 91-year-old woman who, in her last days, described a recurring image, a garden full of empty chairs. Each time she closed her eyes, She saw another chair being occupied by someone she loved and who had already passed away. In the end, all of them were filled, and according to her, a soundless voice said, "Now you can sit down." This kind of metaphor wasn't induced by Dolores, but arose spontaneously in the sessions. And the most impressive thing was the frequency with which the elderly people understood these visions as internal permissions to rest. The symbolism of these scenes doesn't require complex interpretation. They speak directly to the heart, because they represent something that we all at some level know: the need for belonging. Many healthcare professionals who have worked with palliative care also report that elderly patients, in their last moments, seem to talk to someone invisible. They call names, make gestures, smile. Although medicine tries to explain this as hallucination or failure of the neural system, Dolores Cannon suggested another reading. For her, these moments reveal the breaking of the barrier between the planes. Consciousness, still partially connected to the body, begins to perceive dimensions that the physical senses don't capture. What for medicine is failure, for the soul can be an opening. The experience of death then ceases to be closure and becomes passage. And this passage, according to the accounts, is assisted. No elderly person leaves alone, even if there is apparently no one nearby. One aspect that is little explored of these visions is how they influence those who remain. Family members who were present during the last moments often report that something changed inside them when observing the departure. Not because of the pain of loss, but because of what was felt at that instant. There are those who say that the atmosphere became lighter, that there was a feeling of unexpected peace, that a feeling of gratitude took over the room. Dolores believed that this emotional field was a result of what the elderly person was experiencing in their transition, as if the understanding that the soul reached expanded around, positively affecting those who witnessed it. This would explain why so many people changed their view on life and death after closely following the departure of a loved one. Even among those who didn't have any spiritual belief, the accounts maintained the same structure. This made Dolores Cannon reinforce the idea that these visions aren't conditioned by faith or religion, but are part of the nature of the soul. An atheist, for example, described seeing the sea opening in front of him, revealing a path of light. He didn't associate this with any religious concept, but said he understood that this was his crossing. This symbolic neutrality was common. The experiences adjusted to the emotional and sensory repertoire of each individual without imposing any doctrine. This made the accounts even more authentic and universal. Instead of reinforcing beliefs, they offered understanding. And this understanding, according to the elderly people, was all they needed at that moment. Another relevant point is the absence of regret in the final visions. Even elderly people who believed they had wasted their lives or committed serious mistakes didn't report punishment. What they saw was an opportunity to understand with more clarity, as if the pain of the past lost strength in the face of the revealed truth. A man who abandoned his children when they were young said he saw a scene of them playing happily without his presence. And he understood that despite his absence, love found other ways to reach them. This type of vision doesn't change the past, but transforms the meaning that the soul gives to it. Dolores said that this was the true miracle of the transition, the silent emotional healing that precedes the end, a type of forgiveness that doesn't need to be said, just felt. In many cases, the elderly people reported that they felt a slight detachment from the body before the vision started. It wasn't pain nor discomfort, just a growing lightness. It was as if the body was left behind while something inside them became more conscious. This moment, described as the beginning of the passage, was the point at which all previous experiences began to align. Distant memories, forgotten words, old loves, everything seemed to come to the surface to compose a mosaic. And in this mosaic, the soul saw its path with clarity. There were no doubts, just acceptance. Dolores Cannon explained that this detachment was the harbinger of the crossing, and that, in that instant, the soul already knew that there was no turning back. But curiously, this didn't generate fear. It generated peace. In several accounts analyzed by Dolores Cannon, a phenomenon appears that many call life review. But unlike the traditional idea of a movie that plays in seconds, What the elderly people saw was more intimate and subjective. Instead of complete scenes, sensations came linked to specific moments. A smell, a sound, someone's expression, a felt emotion. Each fragment seemed to contain a subtle lesson, as if the soul was gathering the essential elements of existence to understand its own path. It wasn't judgment, it was integration. Dolores reinforced that this didn't serve to punish or praise, but to clarify. It was the soul saying to itself, "Now I understand." And this understanding became the key to move forward, without weight and without pending issues. Another recurring revelation in these final moments was the disappearance of the notion of time. Elderly people reported that everything seemed to happen in a single instant, even if there were many images and feelings. They said that there was no more past nor future, just a deep now. And in this now, they understood that everything they lived had value, even the suffering, even the mistakes. Nothing was discarded. Everything was part of a greater learning, which now revealed itself clearly. This state of expanded consciousness, according to Dolores Cannon, isn't exclusive to religious or meditators. It manifests spontaneously when the soul prepares to leave the body. And this preparation is guided not by the fear of death, but by the recognition that life had purpose. In some cases, the final revelation was so simple that it was surprising. A man who spent his life seeking deep philosophical answers said he saw only the face of his wife smiling. He said that everything he needed to know was there. Others saw the sky at dusk, the swaying of a tree, the sound of their own laughter when they were children. Nothing grand or mystical, just the essential. Dolores Cannon believed that this showed a powerful truth. In the end, what really matters are the moments of presence, sincere affections, and the small beauties that often go unnoticed. The divine in these accounts manifested itself in simplicity, and the soul seemed to understand finally that it didn't need to have done more, but only to have lived with more attention. There were also accounts in which the elderly people didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but felt an enveloping presence, almost like an invisible hug. They described it as if they were being supported by something they knew very well, but couldn't name. It was a feeling of home. Dolores Cannon said that this was the final stage of the process, when the soul has already understood everything it needed, and now it only remains to allow itself to leave. This feeling wasn't of loss, but of return, like someone who walked a lot and finally finds their way back. Many reported that at that instant, the body seemed to not matter anymore. The breathing became light, the heart calmed down, and the mind no longer fought. It was the end of the resistance, and the beginning of something that human words still can't describe. Dolores Cannon didn't promise definitive answers, but the accounts she gathered over decades pointed to something that is worth considering. The moment of death, especially for the elderly, can be much more than a closure. It can be a synthesis, a last lesson, silent and revealing, about what is really important. For those who listened to these accounts with attention, a new way of looking at old age emerged, not as a decline, but as a preparation rich and full of meaning. With each new testimony, it became more evident that there is a greater intelligence conducting this process, and that at the right moment, it shows exactly what we need to see, not to scare or punish, but to liberate, to allow the soul to follow its path with understanding. If you've made it this far, perhaps this message has awakened something in you. If it touched your memory, your intuition, or your heart, please consider sharing this video with someone who might benefit. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe and follow more content that deals with life and the soul with respect, clarity, and depth. What has been said here doesn't need to be believed as absolute truth, but it deserves to be listened to, because in the end we all share the same destiny, and perhaps by understanding it better, we can live with more lightness, more presence, and more meaning. May each one find in their time their own revelation.